Today we are on page 25, and the title of today is Multiplying and Dividing Rational Numbers. So before we get started, I just want you to remember the rules for multiplying and dividing integers. So go to the left-hand side of the page, go to page 24, and I want you to write down the rules for multiplying and dividing integers. If you need a reminder, you might have to flip back in your notes a little bit. Now try to write down as many rules as you remember. Hopefully you had most of these written down. So let's start with the rules for multiplying. So if I am multiplying a positive times a positive, your answer is going to be a positive. Good. If I am multiplying a negative times a negative, my answer is going to be a positive also. A negative times a negative is a positive. How about if they're different? How about a positive times a negative? What does that equal? Positive times negative, they are different, so my answer is negative. And then what if I switch it? What if I do a negative times a positive? Well, that's the same thing. A negative times a positive is also a negative since they're different. So let's write the rules for dividing. And if you remember, rules for dividing is the same thing as rules for multiplying, which is why we're learning them together. So positive divided by a positive is a positive. A negative divided by a negative is also a positive. They're the same. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, and a negative divided by a positive is also a negative. So those are all of our rules for multiplying and dividing integers. So go back to the right-hand side of the page. The key here is to use the same rules that we just talked about. Use the same rules as multiplying and dividing integers. And if you need a reminder, I want you to see the page in your notes that this is on. So let's flip back to our integers unit and let's look for multiplying and dividing. And there it is. Multiplying and dividing integers is on page 15. So I want you to write on your notes, see page 15 if you need a reminder of what those rules are. All right. So now we're going to do some examples of multiplying and dividing integers, and I'm going to bet it has been a while since most of you have multiplied and divided fractions. So let's remind ourselves how we multiply fractions. All right, so this should be a review. So just to be clear, why don't you multiply 1/2 times 3/4 for me and see what you get. So hopefully you said, oh, I remember multiplying fractions. You just multiply across. You multiply the tops and you multiply the bottoms together. So I do 1 times 3. 1 times 3 is 3 over, let's multiply my denominators, 2 times 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So 1/2 times 3/4 is 3/8. Hopefully you got that correct. If not, please go on Khan Academy and remind yourself how to multiply fractions. Just multiply the tops, multiply the bottoms, simplify if possible. This one is in the most simple form because nothing divides into 3 and into 8. Now for the tricky one, how you divide fractions. Okay, how do we divide fractions? I would like you to write down the rules or the steps for dividing fractions. Hopefully you wrote down something along the lines of KFC maybe. Some of you learned KFC, some of you just learned the steps. I'm gonna write these in different colors so that it's really clear what we're doing. KFC, what does that mean? If you didn't learn it this way, that's fine. It means the same thing as how you learned how to divide fractions, I'm sure. KFC means, I'm gonna write out the acronym, KFC. Yes, it is a place for chicken, but it also is a way to remember how to divide fractions. KFC means keep the first number, or the first fraction, I will say. The F stands for flip the second fraction. So that means make the numerator into the denominator, put the denominator in the numerator. And the C means change the division to multiplication. So let's see an example of that. On your own, I would like you to try to use these rules to divide 1/2 divided by 3/4. Let's see what we get when we do that. And if we follow our steps, let's do step 1, the K. Keep the first fraction. The first fraction here is 1/2. So I take 1/2. My next step is flip the second fraction. So 3/4, I take that and I just switch the numbers in the fraction. So this becomes 4/3. And then step 3, change the division to multiplication. Here's my division sign. Let's change that to multiplication. Now we just follow our rules for multiplying fractions because now we have a multiplication problem. So remember when we're multiplying, I multiply the tops, I multiply the bottoms, and I go on my merry way. So 1 times 4 is 4 over 2 times 3 is 6. So our answer is 4/6. What are we missing? We need to simplify. So 4 and 6, 2 can go into both of those. So let's divide the top and the bottom by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So my answer here is 2/3. So 1/2 divided by 3/4 is 2/3. Hopefully we remember our rules for multiplying and dividing fractions. Again, I'm going to reiterate this. If you were rusty on dividing fractions, go ahead and go on Khan Academy and practice that a little bit. That will help you out for this unit since we are working with fractions a lot. If you're clear on that, let's go back to the right-hand side, back to page 25, and let's continue our notes here. So I'm just going to do some examples on multiplying and dividing rational numbers. So let's start by multiplying and dividing -5 and 1/5. Let's do a division problem to start. Divided by 2 and 1/3. All right, let's see what we need to do here. Whenever you see a mixed number, your first instinct should be to write this as an improper fraction. So let's write our mixed number as an improper fraction. All right, so how we do that, remember we multiply the bottom number and the big number, and then we add the top number. So we multiply these and then add these. So 5 times 5 is 25. 25 plus 1 is 26. Do not forget to bring down your negative. That is super important. So this becomes negative 26 over, keep your denominator from the original mixed number. So 26 over 5, it is negative. And then let's just bring down the rest of our problem, divided by, oh, here's another mixed number. Let's change it to an improper fraction. So 2 1/3, I'm gonna multiply the 3 times the 2, and I get 6. And then add the 1, I get 7 as my numerator, over, keep your denominator from your mixed number, so that is 7 over 3. So now I have my improper fractions. Now I can just divide these, right? So let's follow our steps for KFC. Keep, flip, change. So I want to keep the first number. Negative 26 over 5 stays as negative 26 over 5. I want to flip the second number, right? So 7/3 becomes 3 over 7. And then my C, I want to change the division into multiplication. Now, how do I multiply fractions? I multiply across. I multiply 26 times 3, and I multiply 5 times 7. If you are unclear what 26 times 3 is, feel free to use a calculator. You are allowed to use a calculator on this unit. So if I do 26 times 3, I get 78. So my numerator becomes 78 over, if I do 5 times 7, I will get 35. So this becomes 78 over 35. Then I need to look if I can simplify that. Well, nothing goes in to 78 and 35. So this would be a simplest form for my improper fraction. But I am missing one thing. What do I need to think about? I need to think about the signs. So I look here and I say, okay, I'm multiplying different signs. I'm multiplying a negative times a positive fraction. A negative times a positive is a negative. So my answer becomes negative 78 over 35. And that is huge, okay? This is negative because a negative times a positive is a negative. You could also go to your original problem and say, okay, a negative divided by a positive is also a negative. So either one, because we use the same rules for multiplying and dividing, both of those will work. What if we want to put this into a mixed number? We can do that. Let's think, how many times does 35 go into 78? 35 goes into 78 2 times without going over, because 35 times 2 is 70. So this is negative, notice I'm bringing along the negative, 2. And then to get from 70 to 78, I have 8 left over. So 8, my denominator is 35, so this becomes negative 2 and 8/35 if you would like to simplify it. Let's move on to a new example. Let's do decimals. Let's take negative 2.5 times negative 3.6. All right, decimals is a little different. You're welcome to do this by hand. You are welcome to use a calculator on this. I just need you to pay attention to the signs. So a negative times a negative equals what? A negative times a negative equals a positive. So I know right away that my answer is going to be a positive number. All right, so on this, again, you can multiply them by hand. We can use a calculator. Let's do 2.5 times 3.6, and I get 9. So this equals 9, and I already decided my answer was going to be positive. So this is a positive 9 as our answer. Okay, you can also check your work on a calculator by using your negative feature. It's a little different on different calculators, but hopefully we know how to use our negatives. So if I check that by doing negative 2.5 times a negative 3.6, I should get positive 9 as well, and I do. So if I include my negatives there, you can just double check that by using your negatives in your calculator. So that gives us 9. All right, let's do one more example. Maybe 2 more if I feel like it. Let's try multiplying multiple things together. So let's try negative 1/7 times 4/5 times negative 7. Let's do 3 things together. Notice these are in parentheses just for notation, just so we don't get confused. A lot of times we see them when we're multiplying, so it doesn't look like we're subtracting this 7 here. We know we're multiplying those together. So when you have multiple things multiplied together, we need to think of our order of operations. This is all multiplications, what's all on the same level, so I just move left to right. So let's start by multiplying my first 2 fractions together. Let's do negative 1/7 times 4/5. Since I am multiplying, all I need to do is multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. 1 times 4 is 4, and 7 times 5 is 35. So this is 4/35. What do I need to think of whenever I'm doing a problem like this? I need to think about my sign. So a negative times a positive is a negative. They're different signs, so this becomes a negative 4/35. All right, so now let's just bring down the rest of my problem. Let's bring down this times negative 7. So this becomes times negative 7. All right, what do I need to do if I have a fraction times a whole number? I need to make this whole number into a fraction. So what is negative 7 as a fraction? Negative 7 as a fraction is negative 7/1. So I'm doing 4/35 times negative 7/1. What is super nice about multiplying fractions is you do not need a common denominator. So that saves us a lot of time. All we do is multiply the tops, multiply the bottoms. So I do 4 times 7, and I get 28 over, and then I do 35 times 1, and I get 35. 28 over 35. And then I need to think about my signs. Don't forget them. A negative times a negative, my answer is going to be a positive, because a negative times a negative is always a positive. So this is my answer. The last thing I need to think about is if I can simplify this problem. I look, can anything divide into 28 and 35? Yes, I believe we can divide 28 by 7 and 35 by 7. So 28 divided by 7 gives us 4, and 35 divided by 7 gives us 5. So this becomes 4/5. It is not an improper fraction, so I don't even need to think about changing it to a mixed number. So we are done with this problem. And I would like to do one more problem. Let's see what happens if I have enough room down here. If I take a decimal, 0.5, divided by a fraction. So let's do 0.5 divided by 1/2. Let's see what happens if I do 0.5 divided by 1/2. Okay, multiple ways to move on here. What do I want if these are in different forms? I want them to be in the same form. So I can either change my decimal to a fraction or change my fraction to a decimal. Remember, if you have a repeating decimal, please do not change it to a decimal, please then change the other one to a fraction, because repeating decimals will give us a rounded answer, which will not be super precise. So let's just change the decimal to a fraction. Again, you could do either one. 1.5 as a fraction is the same as 1/2. Hopefully we know that one. If you want to walk through the steps off to the side, I'll do that. Okay, the 5 is in the tenths place, so 10 goes in my denominator, and then it's 5 here, so this is 5/10. 5/10, you can divide the top and the bottom by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So 0.5 is the same as 1/2. And I have divided by 1/2. All right. Some of you already see what our answer here is, but I'm going to go through our KFC steps just to be super clear. So KFC, keep, change, flip. Keep the first fraction. And I'm going to change my original problem a little bit. I forgot to add this -1/2 here. All right, there we go. So back to KFC. Keep the first fraction, so that is 1/2. Keep 1/2. F, flip this second fraction, put the 2 in the top, the 1 in the bottom. It is still negative, so this becomes -2/1. Don't forget to bring along your negative every single step, otherwise it could mess you up. And then my last guy is to change the division to multiplication. Now I just need to multiply across, so I multiply the tops, I multiply the bottoms. Don't need a common denominator when you're multiplying or dividing, super nice. And that equals 1 times 2 is 2 on the top, and 2 times 1 is 2 on the bottom. Now I just need to remember, what is a positive times a negative? A positive times a negative gives us a negative, so bring along your negative with your answer. All right, can I simplify these? Yes. I can think of this as 2 divided by 2. I can divide the top and the bottom by 2. However you do it, 2 divided by 2 is 1, or you would get 1/1. 1/1 simplifies to 1. So bring along your negative, and this is -1. Some of you could have seen that from this step, 1/2 divided by -1/2. Whenever we're doing something divided by itself, you will always get 1. So if you know, okay, well I know this is divided by itself, so I'm going to get 1, and then a positive divided by a negative gives us negative. You might have been able to skip these steps for this specific problem if you're clear on your dividing. All right, so let's do some practice on multiplying and dividing rational numbers.